The world after the eclipse was nothing like anyone had imagined. It had been a strange day when the sun vanished, cloaking the earth in darkness. People had gazed at the sky, confused and afraid, expecting that perhaps it was just a dense cloud cover or some astronomical anomaly. But the hours had stretched on, turning to days, then weeks, and eventually, humanity understood, the sun was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Years passed, and Earth became a different place. People adapted, not through any miraculous scientific breakthrough but rather through the quiet evolution of their bodies. Human sight sharpened, attuned to the faint light of stars that never fully reached the ground. Skin thickened and became pale, reflecting any tiny glimmers that might help them see. With no natural light, plants and animals either transformed or disappeared entirely, forcing humans into unfamiliar lifestyles. Among the people of this eternally darkened world was a young woman named Mira. Her family had been one of the early survivors who learned to live in the caves, where they could be somewhat insulated from the harsh conditions above ground. Now, Mira's eyes sparkled with an unusual brightness, a trait that had made her the target of awe and suspicion alike. Unlike others, she could see better in the dark, almost as though her sight was tuned to the shadows themselves. Rumors had spread through the caverns that she was different, perhaps even more attuned to the world than anyone else, though she'd always denied it. She'd never truly understood why she could see things others couldn't. But the day everything changed for her began with a simple errand. Her family sent her to trade goods with a nearby community. Carrying her pack, she ventured through the winding caves, carefully navigating paths she knew well. Still, as she went deeper into the unfamiliar corridors, something felt different, a weight in the air, a tension that made her heart beat faster, though she couldn't say why. The further she went, the more she felt an almost electric pulse under her skin, like a warning or a call. It was then that Mira caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. Turning, she saw a shadow, too sharp, too dense to be natural, hovering in the darkness. She hesitated, sensing its gaze on her, though she couldn't make out any clear form. Swallowing her fear, Mira moved forward, but the shadow drifted beside her, its presence as chilling as the dark air around her. Yet, there was no harm, no touch, just silent company. It wasn't until Mira reached the edge of her destination that the shadow vanished, dissolving as if it had been only a trick of the dark. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, she traded her goods quickly, her eyes scanning the other traders and their wary glances. Rumors about shadows had circulated through the communities for months now. People had whispered about figures moving in the darkness, speaking of things they didn't fully understand. Some claimed it was just the effect of eternal night, a trick of the mind from living without sunlight. But others spoke of more sinister things, creatures, unseen but very much alive, emerging from the darkness. On her way back, Mira felt the shadow again, closer this time, its presence more tangible, more insistent. It was almost as if it wanted her attention. Taking a shaky breath, she stopped in her tracks and whispered, "What are you?" A pause, filled with silence so deep it was almost tangible. Then, a soft, almost inaudible sound came from beside her, a single word that sent shivers down her spine. "Remember." Mira gasped and turned, but the shadow was gone. She staggered back, her mind racing. Remember? What did it mean? She had no memories of a time before the darkness. Her family had only spoken of light in stories, tales that felt like dreams rather than reality. The sun, the sky, those things felt as distant and unreachable as the stars. But as she trudged through the tunnels, that single word echoed in her mind, tugging at something deep and buried, something she couldn't quite reach. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thought, but the feeling clung to her, as though it were more than just an idea, more like a truth waiting to resurface. Over the next few days, Mira kept mostly to herself. She hadn't told her family about the encounter, though it lingered in her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. She became restless, unable to focus on her tasks. The darkness, once so familiar, began to feel oppressive. The shadows seemed to move more often, slipping through her vision like wisps of smoke, reminding her of that single word. It wasn't until a week later that she encountered the shadow again. This time, it appeared in her own cave, watching her with an intent that made her skin prickle. Gathering her courage, she took a step toward it. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The shadow didn't answer but instead drifted toward a wall in her cave, a place she'd never paid much attention to. As she watched, the dark outline traced a shape there, faint but unmistakable, the shape of a doorway. Curiosity overtook her fear, and Mira reached out, pressing her hand to the cold, unyielding rock. For a moment, she thought she felt something, a pulse, or a vibration, a heartbeat echoing from somewhere deep within. Her heart raced, and she pulled her hand back, breathless. The shadow was gone, but the imprint of the doorway lingered, an invisible mark on her senses. Over the next few days, she returned to that spot, pressing her hand there, waiting, hoping for something to happen. It became a sort of ritual, her secret that both haunted and excited her. Each time she touched it, she felt the faint pulse, as if something lay beyond, waiting. Then, one night, as she lay in bed, Mira felt an overwhelming compulsion to go back to the wall. She rose, careful not to wake her family, and crept through the darkened corridors to the hidden doorway. She pressed her hand against it, and this time, the pulse was stronger, almost rhythmic. Her heart pounded in time with it, and she closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the sensation. The wall shifted beneath her palm. Slowly, silently, a seam appeared in the stone, widening to reveal a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. Taking a deep breath, Mira stepped inside. The air was different here, stale, ancient, carrying a scent that reminded her of something lost. She moved forward cautiously, the walls closing around her as the passage twisted and turned. The darkness was absolute, but her eyes adjusted, allowing her to see faint outlines, shadows that hinted at a larger space beyond. As she stepped into a larger chamber, her breath caught. There, in the center, was something she had never seen, a machine, intricate and pulsing with a faint, otherworldly glow. It looked like a relic from a time long forgotten, its surface covered in symbols that seemed both familiar and strange. Mira reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. At her touch, the machine shuddered to life, emitting a low hum that resonated through the chamber. She stumbled back, her heart racing, as lights flickered on its surface, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, more solid than any she had seen before. It was cloaked in darkness, its face obscured, but its voice was clear, cutting through the silence. "You should not be here," it said, its tone neither hostile nor welcoming, but something in between. Mira swallowed, summoning her courage. "What is this place?" The figure was silent for a moment, then spoke, its words laced with a sense of history, of things long buried. "This is the remnant, a relic of the world before the eclipse. It holds memories, knowledge, things that were meant to be lost." "Why?" Mira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because some truths are too dangerous to remember," the figure replied. Mira took a shaky breath, her eyes darting between the pulsing machine and the shadowy figure. The weight of the place pressed down on her, like stepping into an ancient tomb where the walls themselves were watching. And the figure radiated an unspoken authority, as if it was a part of the remnant itself. "What truths?" she asked, her voice a tremor. "And why was I led here?" The figure's gaze seemed to deepen, as if it were seeing through her, peeling back layers of memory and experience she wasn't even aware she possessed. "You have the sight," it murmured, almost to itself. "Your eyes were drawn to the hidden world. You were always meant to find this place." Mira's pulse quickened. She'd heard stories of people with strange gifts, but never anything like this. "But, why me?" she pressed. "I never asked for any of this. I don't understand." The figure lifted a hand, and in the air before them, an image appeared. It was hazy at first, but then it sharpened, showing a world flooded with light, a place that Mira knew only from tales told around the fire, of what life had been before the endless night. People walked in this world, laughing, faces tilted to the sun. The sky was vast and blue, and Mira could almost feel the warmth of it on her skin. But then the scene shifted, growing dark and tumultuous. The sky was filled with strange shadows, twisting and coiling like smoke. The sun flickered, dimmed, and vanished, plunging everything into darkness. And then she saw them, the shadows. The same ones she'd seen in the caves, only here they were, alive, moving with purpose, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. "What are they?" Mira whispered, her voice thick with fear and fascination. "They are the remnants of the world before," the figure answered. "After the eclipse, when the sun disappeared, they were born from the chaos. Shadows that slipped between worlds, carrying fragments of light and memory. They are neither alive nor dead, but they are watching. They've always been watching." Mira swallowed hard, feeling a chill creep up her spine. "Watching for what?" "For a way back," the figure replied. "A way to return to the light." The words hung heavily in the air, and Mira felt an almost unbearable tension in her chest. She had so many questions that felt like they were clawing at her insides. But before she could ask another, the figure gestured toward the machine in the center of the chamber. "This device was built to contain them," it said, voice tinged with regret. "To trap the memories and secrets that no longer belong to the world of light. But it was never meant to last forever. The machine is weakening. They're slipping through the cracks. And the longer they're out there, the more powerful they'll become." Mira's heart pounded. She thought of the shadows she'd seen lurking in the darkness, felt the strange pull they'd exerted over her, the way they'd spoken that single, haunting word. "Remember, if the machine fails," she began slowly, "what will happen to them? And to us?" The figure's gaze seemed to darken, a subtle shift that made Mira's skin prickle with unease. "If it fails entirely, the shadows will consume what little light remains in this world. They will become something more, entities, hungry for the world they lost. And humanity will become little more than their vessels." The horror of the words took her breath away. The figure's warning echoed in her mind, each syllable pounding like a heartbeat. She stared at the machine, its ancient gears and glowing symbols, feeling a sudden, overwhelming responsibility settle on her shoulders. "What do I have to do?" she asked, barely managing to keep the tremor out of her voice. The figure hesitated, then extended a hand toward her, its shadowy form blurring and distorting as it moved. "There is a way to renew the machine," it said, voice barely above a whisper. "But it will cost you." Mira clenched her fists, feeling the weight of those words. "What kind of cost?" "To hold the shadows at bay," the figure replied. "The machine requires an anchor, a piece of a soul, bound to it, to keep it steady, to keep the darkness contained." Mira's mouth went dry. "A soul? You mean, someone has to give up their life?" The figure inclined its head, a silent acknowledgement that sent a chill through her. "It is the price that was paid by those before you," it said. "A piece of themselves, given willingly, to keep the shadows from consuming the world." Mira's mind raced. She thought of her family, her community, the people she'd grown up with, who lived each day in the cold, unending night. She thought of the shadows, creeping ever closer, hungry for the light they'd lost. "What if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "What if I fail?" "Then they will come for you," the figure replied. "They have marked you, Mira. They are drawn to you because you have the sight. They know you can see them, and they will not stop until they have taken what they seek." Mira's blood ran cold. She knew what the figure meant. She'd felt the shadows watching her, sensed their hunger. And now, it was clear, they wanted her, her light, her memories, everything that made her human. Taking a deep breath, she nodded, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll give what I have to." The figure inclined its head, and the machine began to hum, its gears turning, its lights brightening. Mira felt a strange warmth radiate from it, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of sunlight in the depths of the machine's glow. "Place your hand here," the figure instructed, gesturing to a small panel on the machine's surface. Mira hesitated, then reached out, pressing her palm against the cold metal. The machine pulsed beneath her touch, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo her heartbeat. As she stood there, she felt something strange, a pulling sensation, as though part of her were being drawn into the machine. Memories flickered through her mind, images of her family, her friends, the life she'd known in the darkness. She felt a pang of sorrow, a deep, aching loss, as pieces of herself were drawn into the device. But even as she felt herself fading, she also felt a strange strength surging within her. The machine pulsed brighter, its light growing stronger, pushing back the shadows that had crept closer, banishing them to the edges of the chamber. And then, suddenly, the light went out. The machine fell silent, and Mira staggered back, feeling weak and disoriented. The figure was gone, and the shadows had retreated, leaving her alone in the darkness. She glanced around, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her heart pounding. The chamber was still, silent, as though nothing had happened. But she knew better. She could feel the emptiness inside her, the part of herself she'd given up to keep the shadows at bay. Stumbling back through the narrow passage, she found herself outside, in the familiar darkness of the world she knew. But as she looked around, she noticed something different, a faint glow on the horizon, a shimmer of light that hadn't been there before. It was faint, barely visible, but it was enough. The faint light on the horizon captivated Mira. It pulsed like the machine's glow had, weak yet persistent, barely breaking through the eternal darkness. She had never seen anything like it, a hint of something beyond the pitch-black nights. Her heart raced. If the machine's energy was spilling out, did that mean the shadows could sense it too? As she stumbled back toward the village, her mind spun with questions. That eerie figure's words echoed inside her head, *, they have marked you. They won't stop until they've taken what they seek, *, each footstep felt heavier, burdened with the knowledge of the deal she had made. A part of her would always belong to the machine, yet she was the only one who could keep the shadows contained. But for how long? The village was quiet as she approached, almost unnaturally so. Normally, she would see at least a few lanterns glowing in windows, but tonight everything was dark. As Mira reached her family's door, her heart sank. The familiar warmth that usually greeted her was absent, and instead, a deep silence lay over the home. "Mother?" Mira's voice came out as a whisper, tentative and uncertain. "Nothing." With a growing sense of dread, Mira stepped inside, her fingers tracing the walls to guide her. She moved through the house, stopping at each room, listening, feeling. The strange energy from the machine was still coursing through her, and it amplified every detail, heightening her senses. Her mother and little brother were gone. Their beds lay empty, untouched. Panic clawed at her. Had the shadows already come for her family while she was away? Just then, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a slight glimmer on the edge of her vision. Mira turned, and in the darkness, she saw the faint outline of a figure standing by the door. Its form was dark and wispy, like smoke swirling in the night, and its eyes glowed faintly, watching her with a predatory focus. It was a shadow, but more defined than the one she had encountered before. This one felt conscious, alive. She could feel its hunger, an insatiable desire radiating from it, as if it were drawn to her very presence. "Where is my family?" Mira demanded, her voice shaking but determined. The figure didn't speak, but it moved forward, its form shifting, growing denser, more human-like. Mira's breath caught as she felt an overwhelming pressure pressing down on her, like the weight of the night itself. It was as if the darkness had taken form, becoming a living, breathing entity. "You've opened the door," a voice whispered, echoing in her mind rather than aloud. It was hollow, ancient, filled with something dark and insidious. "You have made a trade, and now we can see you. We can taste your light." Mira clenched her fists, her mind racing. "I've given my part. I've done what you wanted, now leave my family alone." The figure's form wavered, and she thought she saw a flicker of something, a faint, almost amused smile. "What you have given is only a beginning. The machine was only one part of the chain, but now you are linked to us, and to everything that comes after." The word sent a chill down her spine. What does that mean?" "You will know in time," the shadow whispered, its voice like a slithering wind. And then, it began to fade, melting into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. But before it disappeared completely, Mira felt something, an invisible mark, an impression, like a scar left on her soul. She stood there, breathing heavily, her mind spinning. They could sense her now. Every time she'd used the machine, every piece of herself she had given had only strengthened their connection. Her sight was a gateway, a beacon that they could follow, and with each use, they would grow stronger, drawing closer. She had to warn the village. As dauntless as it was, Mira didn't stop to rest. She sprinted through the streets, knocking on doors, gathering everyone in the town square. People emerged, bleary-eyed and confused, but they came, sensing the urgency in her voice. As she looked over the crowd, Mira saw the familiar faces of her neighbors and friends, the people she'd grown up with. Her family was nowhere to be seen, but she couldn't let her terror show. She took a deep breath, her voice loud and clear as she spoke. There's a force out there, something that watches us in the dark. The shadows we've all seen? They're not just passing phantoms. They're growing stronger, feeding on what little light we have left. A ripple of fear went through the crowd. Murmurs filled the square, people shifting uneasily. What can we do? Someone called out. We have to be careful, Mira replied, her voice stronger than she felt. There's a machine, an ancient relic that was supposed to contain them. I made a deal to keep it working. But they've marked me, and they won't stop until they've consumed every last light. She paused, swallowing hard. The shadows are coming closer. We have to prepare, to fight if we must. But we can't let them control us. There was a tense silence as the weight of her words settled over the crowd. Finally, an elder spoke up, a man whose eyes were clouded by years of hardship and survival in the endless night. Mira, he said slowly, if what you're saying is true, then we have no choice. We must protect our home, our people. He raised his voice, a spark of defiance flickering in his weary eyes. We will stand together against whatever darkness comes for us. Mira felt a surge of determination, bolstered by the unity of her people. She knew they couldn't hide forever, but they could resist. They could fight. Yet, deep down, a part of her knew that the battle had only just begun. As the crowd dispersed, Mira's heart beat with a mix of determination and dread. She was now more aware than ever of the silent threat creeping through the night. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to fortify the village, yet that nagging fear about her family's disappearance gnawed at her, refusing to let go. It was as if the darkness itself had taken them. Later that night, as she sat alone in her small, dimly lit room, she noticed the faint pulse of the machine in her pocket, the relic she'd carried back to the village after the encounter with the shadow. The pulsing felt alive, synchronized with her heartbeat. She turned it over, feeling its cold surface and pondering its origins. How long had it been here, and what ancient civilization had created it? Suddenly, Mira felt a chill. The temperature dropped, and her breath came out in soft puffs. Shadows began to stretch along the walls, moving of their own accord, coiling and twisting like snakes. She backed up, feeling trapped in her own room, her hand clutching the machine like a lifeline. And then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, the shadows dissipated. But Mira couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. A faint whisper filled the room. It was a voice, low and echoing, as if it were reverberating through miles of hollow stone. You should have never tampered with the relic. Mira turned to face the direction of the sound, only to find an unfamiliar figure standing there. Its form was murky, shifting constantly, its face barely distinguishable. Who are you? Mira demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure's head tilted, the shadowy haze that made up its body swirling in response. I am a watcher, a keeper of the eternal dark. I protect the boundary between realms, but you, Mira, have crossed it. Her heart pounded. A boundary between realms, she felt as though she were on the verge of understanding something monumental but terrifying. What do you want? Mira asked, clutching the relic tightly in her hand. The watcher's eyes, glowing faintly like embers, seemed to pierce through her. The darkness has always been meant to protect, it said. You disrupted that balance. You let the shadows reach out, and now they are awake, hungry. A jolt of fear shot through her. She thought the shadows were just ghosts of some sort, harmless apparitions. But now, she was beginning to understand that they were far more than that. They were entities of their own, lurking beyond a thin veil that separated their realm from the village. The Watcher took a step closer, its form flickering and wavering like smoke. Your bond with the relic makes you a beacon, Mira. You are a gateway, and they will come for you. They will come for everyone you know and love. Mira's thoughts raced. She had to find her family, she had to find a way to close this gateway before the shadows fully crossed into her world. But she was interrupted by the figure's next words, chilling her even more. There is a choice. Either let them come, and let the world be consumed, or return the relic to the void from which it came. But how can I stop them? Mira's voice cracked, a feeling of hopelessness seeping in. The Watcher's gaze hardened. To return the relic, you must journey beyond the borders of your world and into the endless night. Beyond the horizon, you'll find the boundary. Her heart sank. No one had ever ventured beyond the known limits of the village. It was said to be nothing but an infinite abyss. But if that was the only way to protect the village, to keep her family safe, then she had no choice. The Watcher's figure began to fade, dissolving into tendrils of smoke. Remember, Mira, it whispered, the shadows are patient. They can wait until you falter. And then, she was alone again. That night, Mira barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of twisted figures lurking in the darkness, waiting to emerge. She had one task, but it felt as if the odds were impossibly stacked against her. But the determination to protect her family, to protect the village, drove her forward. The next morning, with a pack full of essentials and the relic in her hand, she set out toward the edge of the village. People watched her go, their faces tense, filled with worry and hope. As she left, she could almost feel the shadows retreat, as if they sensed she was walking into their realm. The air grew colder, the light from the village lanterns growing fainter behind her with each step. It was a daunting path, but with each footfall, Mira knew she was getting closer to the truth, closer to the place where the shadows waited. After hours of walking, she saw it, a line on the horizon, dark and menacing, like a wound in the world. She could feel the pull of the relic in her pocket, as if it were leading her, guiding her toward the point where reality and the darkness met. The boundary loomed, an unearthly barrier where the sky seemed to blend with the ground, a swirling void of blackness. She could sense the ancient energy radiating from it, a force that transcended time and space. But before she could step forward, the shadows emerged, forming a wall of darkness. They moved as one, blocking her path, their ghostly eyes fixed on her. Mira's heart raced as the shadows pooled before her, swirling and writhing like smoke, blocking her path to the boundary. Their ghostly eyes gleamed faintly, as if watching her with an eerie intelligence, and she sensed something in them, an ancient hunger, vast and insatiable. Swallowing her fear, Mira clutched the relic tightly. Its pulse seemed to respond to her touch, vibrating with a rhythm that felt like the beat of her own heart. She took a step forward, but the shadows shifted, pressing closer. They didn't attack, but their presence alone was oppressive, like a wave of dread seeping into her bones. Then, one of the shadows broke free from the mass and drifted toward her, forming into a shape she recognized. It took on the appearance of her mother, but the features were twisted, like a fading memory. The sight froze Mira in place. The Shadow Mother reached out a hand, her voice soft and echoing. Mira, you belong here. Come with us. Mira took a step back, forcing herself to remember that this wasn't her real mother, just a trick. She fought to keep her voice steady. You're not real. You can't deceive me. The Shadow Mother's face melted, twisting into a monstrous grin, her voice echoing with many others. Real enough, Mira. Do you even know what's real anymore? The word sent a chill through her, for it wasn't entirely wrong. Since she had touched the relic, reality itself seemed to blur at the edges. The shadows around her flickered, showing glimpses of faces, familiar yet distorted. Some were friends she'd lost, others strangers, all staring at her with hollow eyes. She forced herself to stay grounded. Keep moving forward, she told herself. If she let fear paralyze her now, she'd never make it. Steeling her resolve, she held up the relic. It glowed faintly, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if repelled by its light. The mass of shadows parted, forming a narrow path toward the boundary. It felt like an invitation, a trap, perhaps, but Mira knew it was her only chance. With a deep breath, she began to walk, the relic guiding her steps. The shadows whispered as she passed, voices curling around her mind, each trying to pull her into their darkness. As she reached the boundary, a wave of vertigo hit her. The ground beneath her seemed to dissolve into a swirling abyss, and she had to cling to the relic just to keep her balance. The air was heavy, thick with an ancient, powerful force that she could feel in her bones. And then, the void opened before her, a rift between her world and something beyond, a place where darkness breathed and twisted, alive with a presence she couldn't understand. The relic pulsed stronger, reacting to the energy in the air, almost as if it was calling out to the other side. In the silence, she heard it, a faint heartbeat, mirroring her own, echoing from the depths of the void. It was as if something, or someone, was reaching out to her from the other side. A thrill of fear and curiosity filled her. She leaned closer, peering into the darkness. "Come closer, Mira," a voice called, deep and resonant, reverberating through the emptiness. It was different from the voices of the shadows, calmer, more controlled, almost gentle. Who are you?" Mira whispered, gripping the relic. The voice laughed, a soft, chilling sound. "I am the keeper of the dark. I am the one who watches over the boundary. You, Mira, have crossed a line that should never be crossed." Mira's mind raced. "If you're the keeper, then why haven't you stopped the shadows from crossing over?" The voice sighed, as if tired. "The shadows have always existed, feeding off the light. But your presence, Mira, your touch on the relic, has opened a doorway. They see you as a bridge, a way to finally break free." A shiver ran down her spine. "But, what can I do?" The keeper's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "You are the key, Mira. You can either banish them forever or allow them to consume everything. But the choice comes with a price." Mira's grip on the relic tightened, the weight of the decision settling on her. She looked back at the shadows, writhing and restless, waiting for her to falter. She felt the weight of her village, her family, and everything she loved pressing down on her. The relic pulsed, as if urging her forward, as if it, too, had a will of its own. "What price?" Mira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To close the doorway, you must surrender the relic, let it merge with the boundary, and in doing so, give up a piece of yourself," the keeper explained. "The relic is bound to you now. Letting it go means losing part of your essence, a fragment of your soul." The idea sent a wave of fear through her, but she knew that if she didn't act, the shadows would consume everything she held dear. The keeper's words echoed in her mind. This was her choice, her chance to protect those she loved, even if it meant sacrificing part of herself. Taking a steadying breath, Mira held the relic out toward the boundary. The shadows hissed, recoiling, their forms flickering in agitation. The keeper's voice was a whisper now. "Once you step through, Mira, there is no turning back. You will face the heart of the dark." With one last glance back at the faint glow of the village in the distance, Mira stepped forward, crossing into the boundary. The darkness swallowed her whole, filling her senses with a cold, consuming emptiness. The moment Mira crossed the threshold, an intense cold surrounded her, more profound than anything she had ever felt. It was not merely the chill of absence, but a feeling of something vast and unknowable watching her, steadying her with infinite patience. The relic's soft glow was the only source of light, a faint pulse echoing in the darkness like the last heartbeat of a dying star. She stumbled forward, reaching out with her free hand as if to find solid ground in the vast emptiness around her. But there was nothing, just an expanse that seemed to go on forever, twisting and rippling as if it had a life of its own. "Mira," the keeper's voice drifted through the darkness, quieter now, almost a murmur. You have crossed into the void. Be careful, every step you take brings you closer to the heart of the dark. The relic pulsed in her hand, as if sensing her fear. She clutched it tightly, its warmth a small comfort against the cold emptiness. With each step, her heart raced faster, an anxious rhythm that kept her moving forward despite the oppressive silence. As she ventured deeper, the shadows began to coalesce, forming shapes that flickered in and out of existence. Some took on faces she recognized, friends, family, even her own reflection, but each face was twisted, hollow, staring at her with vacant eyes. They whispered her name in voices barely more than breaths, filling the air with an eerie chorus. "Why have you come here, Mira?" a voice asked, closer than the others. She turned, and before her stood a figure almost identical to herself. This shadow Mira looked at her with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. To save my village," Mira stammered, feeling as though she was staring at a twisted version of her own soul. The shadow Mira smirked. "Save them? Or prove yourself worthy? After all, isn't it power you seek? You could rule this place, Mira. The shadows would bow to you." Mira took a step back, shaking her head. "No, that's not what I want." The shadow Mira laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed through the void. "Isn't it? The relic has already bound itself to you, feeding on your desires, your fears. You can feel it, can't you? The need to control, to shape the darkness as you see fit." Mira's hand tightened around the relic, its warmth now feeling like a burning ember against her skin. She could feel the temptation, a whisper in the back of her mind urging her to seize this power, to let it consume her. But she fought against it, focusing on the memory of her family, her village, the light she had left behind. "I won't let this darkness control me," she said, her voice firm. The shadow Mira's smile faded, and her form began to waver, dissolving into a cloud of dark mist that swirled around Mira before dispersing. The other shadows grew agitated, flickering faster, their whispers growing louder and more chaotic. They seemed to be taunting her, daring her to lose herself in the endless dark. As she pressed forward, the landscape began to change. The darkness took on a strange texture, rippling like water, with glimpses of distant memories and half-formed dreams flitting just out of reach. She could see fragments of her life, moments of joy, sorrow, fear, all reflected in the shadows around her. Then she felt it, a presence far greater than the shadows, something ancient and powerful lurking just beyond her sight. It was like a heartbeat, slow and steady, vibrating through the darkness and resonating with the relic in her hand. "Who are you?" she whispered, feeling the weight of the presence pressing down on her. A low rumble echoed through the void, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I am the dark, Mira, the endless night that has always been and always will be. You sought me out, and now you must face me." Mira's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I didn't come here to face you. I came here to protect my home, my family. If that means standing against you, then so be it." The dark laughed, a sound that shook the very air around her. "Brave words, child. But do you understand what it means to face the darkness? To stand against that which has no end, no mercy." Mira took a steadying breath, feeling the relic's warmth strengthen as she focused on her purpose. "I understand that I can't let you destroy everything I love." The presence of the dark grew closer, filling her vision with an endless void. It felt as though she were standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into a chasm that could swallow her whole. Yet, within that abyss, she could see a faint glimmer of light, a tiny spark flickering in the darkness. "The light within you, it is strong," the dark murmured, almost with a sense of reverence. "But strength alone will not save you. If you wish to challenge me, you must give up a part of yourself, a sacrifice to the shadows." Mira's heart pounded. She knew what the dark wanted, the relic, her only link to the light. But giving it up meant facing the dark without any protection, surrendering her last connection to her world. She looked down at the relic, its gentle glow illuminating her face. It had been her guide, her strength, and yet, in this moment, she felt its weight, as though it was drawing her deeper into the darkness. It was a choice between her own safety and the safety of those she loved. With a deep breath, she held the relic out toward the dark, her hands trembling. If this is the price to protect my world, then I'll pay it. The dark's voice softened, almost approving. Very well, Mira. But remember, every sacrifice leaves a mark. The light within you will dim, and the darkness will leave its trace. As she released the relic, a surge of cold swept over her, piercing through her heart. The glow of the relic faded, dissolving into the shadows, and for a moment she felt utterly alone, stripped of warmth and light. Yet, in the depths of that darkness, she found a new strength, a quiet resilience that burned within her like an ember. The shadows pressed in, whispering, clawing at her mind, but she stood firm, unyielding. The dark seemed to recede, its presence fading as if acknowledging her courage. You have done what few would dare, Mira. But know this, the darkness will always linger, a shadow within you. Mira felt a strange peace settle over her. She had faced the dark and emerged changed, marked by shadows but still standing. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew that as long as she carried the memory of light within her, she would find her way. Mira stood in the vast expanse of darkness, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted within her. The darkness was no longer an overwhelming presence, it was now a part of her, a force she had touched, endured, and survived. She began walking, no longer reliant on the relic or any outward source of light. Her resolve illuminated her path, her very presence casting a gentle glow in the void. She felt, for the first time, a profound peace. The shadows around her seemed to recognize this, drawing back, watching her as if in silent reverence. They no longer whispered or taunted, they were quiet, almost respectful. It was as if they, too, understood the price she had paid and the strength she had gained. Ahead, a faint shimmer appeared, like the first glimmer of dawn after a long, eternal night. Mira moved toward it, each step bringing her closer to the edge of the void. She felt the weight of the dark, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it was a companion, a reminder of her journey, her sacrifice, and the knowledge she had gained. As she approached the shimmer, it grew brighter, expanding to reveal the familiar contours of her world. With a final glance into the darkness, Mira stepped through, leaving the void behind. She emerged into the open, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. She looked around, finding herself in her village, where the people, who had waited anxiously, gasped in relief. Mira's parents rushed forward, embracing her, their warmth filling her with a joy she hadn't realized she had missed so deeply. The village was safe, the darkness held at bay. But Mira knew it was more than just her village that had been saved. Her journey had altered the very nature of the dark realm. Where there had once been only shadows, there was now a seed of light, a reminder that even in the deepest voids, hope could take root.